In the glittering ballrooms of London, Lady Imogen Blackwood is cruelly dismissed as too old for marriage at 30, until the enigmatic Duke of Thornfield sees the wisdom in her eyes that others overlooked. When society mocks her final chance at respectability, will she retreat into bitterness or discover that some flowers bloom most beautifully in autumn? Lady Imogen Blackwood stood tall as she fixed her hair before the mirror. The clock on her wall showed it was almost time for Lord Pembroke's ball. At 30 years old, she knew what others said behind her back. Too old, they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. You look lovely tonight, said her aunt, the Dowager Countess of Hartwick. She helped pin a small flower to Imogen's dress. Your blue dress brings out your eyes. Thank you, Aunt, Imogen said with a smile that hid her worries. She had learned long ago how to hide her true feelings. I have good news, her aunt said as she stepped back to look at Imogen. The Earl of Wexford asked about you today. He seems quite taken with you. Imogen's heart sank a little. The Earl was 65 years old. His hands shook when he held his teacup, and he had buried 2 wives already. But she nodded as if pleased. How kind of him to notice me. He's very rich, her aunt went on, and his house in the country is one of the finest in England. Yes, I have heard that, Imogen said. She picked up her fan and gloves. We should go. The carriage must be waiting. The night air felt cool as they left the house. Stars dotted the sky above London, and the clip-clop of horse hooves on stone streets filled the night. Imogen sat straight in the carriage, just as she had been taught since she was a little girl. A proper lady never slouches even when no one is watching. Remember to smile, her aunt said, as their carriage joined the line of others waiting to drop guests at Lord Pembroke's home. The Earl might ask you to dance. I will remember, Imogen said. She had spent years learning how to be the perfect lady. She spoke French and Italian. She could play the piano, paint pictures, and talk about books and art. She knew which fork to use at dinner and how to make small talk with anyone, but none of that seemed to matter anymore. The young girls who had just turned 18 were the ones who got asked to dance. They were the ones who got married. Lord Pembroke's house blazed with light. Music spilled out the open windows, and the smell of flowers and perfume filled the air. Footmen in red coats helped Imogen and her aunt from their carriage. Imogen took a deep breath and put on her best smile as they walked inside. The ballroom glowed with the light of 100 candles. Ladies in bright dresses moved like flowers in a garden, while men in black coats stood tall among them. Imogen knew most of the people there. She had seen them at balls just like this one for the last 12 years. Lady Imogen, said Lord Pembroke as he came to greet them, you look well tonight, and Lady Hartwick, always a pleasure. Thank you for having us, Imogen said with a small curtsy. The Earl of Wexford is here, Lord Pembroke said with a wink at her aunt. He asked if you would be coming. How nice, Imogen said, though her chest felt tight. She looked across the room and saw the Earl. His white hair shone in the candlelight and he leaned on a cane. Next to him stood his son and daughter-in-law, who were about Imogen's age. Shall we say hello? Her aunt asked, already moving that way. Imogen followed, nodding to friends as she passed. She saw the young girls watching her from the corner of the room. They stood in a group, their white dresses marking them as new to society. Their eyes were bright with hope, their faces fresh and smooth. Imogen remembered when she had stood just like that, sure that her future held love and happiness. Earl Wexford, her aunt called as they drew near, how good to see you. The old man turned and smiled when he saw Imogen. His eyes moved up and down her dress in a way that made her want to cover herself with her shawl. Lady Imogen, he said, his voice rough with age, you look charming tonight. Will you save the first dance for me? I would be honoured, she said. The words came out smooth and polite just as they should. Wonderful, he said, patting her hand. His skin felt like paper. I have been watching you, you know. A woman of your experience would make a fine companion. Imogen's smile stayed fixed on her face, though her heart sank. A companion, not a wife, not a mother to his children, just someone to sit with him as he grew older, to read to him and keep him company until he died. You're too kind, she said. The music began, and the Earl held out his arm. Shall we? Imogen placed her hand on his arm and let him lead her to the dance floor. They joined the other couples as the music swelled. The Earl moved slowly, and Imogen made sure to match his pace. You dance very well, he said, his breath coming fast even though they moved so slowly. Thank you, I've had many years to practice, she said. His laugh turned into a cough. Yes, well, that's what makes you suitable. You know how things should be done. As they turned, Imogen saw her aunt watching with a pleased look. Nearby, the Earl's son and daughter-in-law watched too, but their faces showed no joy. The dance ended, and the Earl kept her hand in his. Lady Imogen, might I call on you tomorrow? I think we have much to discuss. Imogen knew what this meant. He was going to ask to marry her. It wasn't love, but it was a place in the world. It was what she had been raised to want. Yes, my lord, she said. I would welcome your visit. As she walked back to her aunt, Imogen held her head high. This was her life now. This was what being 30 and unmarried meant in London. She would smile and nod and be grateful for the attention of a man old enough to be her grandfather. And she would never let anyone see how empty she felt inside. The summer night filled the gardens of Hartwick House with the sweet smell of roses. Imogen stood by the open doors that led from the ballroom to the garden. The gentle music of violins floated through the air. This was her night, the midsummer ball that her aunt held every year. In years past, Imogen had always felt proud to help host this party. Tonight she felt more like a prize being shown off to the highest bidder. 3 weeks had passed since the Earl of Wexford had called on her. He had not asked for her hand that day, but everyone knew it was coming soon. Imogen had new dresses made. Not too young in style, but fine enough for the future wife of an earl. Her aunt had talked of nothing else for days. There you are, my dear, the Countess said, coming to Imogen's side. The Earl has been looking for you. He seems very eager tonight. I needed some air, Imogen said. The tight feeling in her chest had been with her all day. It's very warm inside. Well, don't stay out here too long. I think he means to make his offer tonight. Her aunt patted her arm. Just think. By this time next year you could be the Countess of Wexford. Imogen nodded and tried to look happy. She should want this. She had been raised to want this. But when she thought of the Earl, with his shaking hands and sour breath, she felt cold all over. I'll come in soon, she promised. Her aunt went back inside and Imogen took a few more deep breaths of the sweet night air. She turned to look at the party through the open doors. The room glowed with the light of hundreds of candles. Ladies in their fine dresses spun around the dance floor like coloured tops. Men in black and white stood straight and tall as they led their partners, and there was the Earl making his way slowly toward the doors. His son and daughter-in-law followed close behind him. Imogen stood up straighter and fixed a smile on her face. Lady Imogen, the Earl said as he stepped into the garden, we've been searching for you. I just stepped out for some fresh air, my lord, Imogen said. She dipped in a small curtsy. The ballroom was quite warm. Indeed, said the Earl. He glanced at his son, who gave him a small nod. Lady Imogen, I have been thinking a great deal about you since we first danced together. Imogen's heart beat faster. This was it, the moment that would decide her future. You're a woman of fine breeding and excellent manners, the Earl went on. Your family name is one of the oldest in England. In many ways you would make an ideal addition to the Wexford family. You're very kind, my lord, Imogen said softly. The Earl cleared his throat. However, after much thought and discussion with my family, I must tell you that I cannot offer for your hand. The words hit Imogen like a slap. She blinked, sure she had not heard him right. I beg your pardon? Father has reconsidered, the Earl's daughter-in-law said, stepping forward. Her face showed she was happy about this news. We have consulted with our family doctor, and he feels that at your age childbearing would be too risky. Imogen felt her face grow hot. I see, she said, though she did not see at all. Just this morning her aunt had been so sure. It's not just that, the Earl said. He at least had the grace to look a bit sorry. A woman your age might find the duties of being my wife too much to handle. The Wexford estates are very large, you know. And father needs someone with more youthful energy, his son added. Someone who can give him many more years of companionship. Imogen stood very still. She knew that people at the ball could see them through the open doors. They would be watching. They would know very soon that the Earl had changed his mind, that he had decided she was too old at 30 to be worth marrying. I understand, Imogen said. Her voice came out clear and calm, though she felt like screaming. You must do what is best for your family, my lord. I'm glad you understand, the Earl said, looking relieved. You're a sensible woman, Lady Imogen. I'm sure you'll make some lucky gentleman a fine companion one day. Not a wife, not a mother, a companion, someone to sit quietly in a corner until she was needed. "If you'll excuse me," Imogen said, "I believe I promised this dance to my cousin." She walked past them, back into the bright ballroom. Every step felt like walking through deep water. She could feel eyes turning to watch her. She could almost hear the whispers starting. "Did you see? The Earl was talking to Lady Imogen in the garden. But he's walking away now. He looks upset. Oh my, do you think he's changed his mind? Well, she is rather old. 30, I heard. No wonder he's looking elsewhere. There are so many fresh young girls this season." Imogen held her head high as she crossed the room. She saw her aunt watching her, a question in her eyes. She saw her cousin Thomas standing by the punch bowl. She went to him and took his arm. "Dance with me," she said. It wasn't quite a question. Thomas, bless him, didn't ask why. He just led her onto the dance floor and took her in his arms as the music began again. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they moved with the other dancers. "No," Imogen said. For the first time she let her true feelings show. "But I will be." They danced until the song ended. Then Imogen thanked her cousin and made her way to her aunt. "What happened?" the Countess whispered. "I saw you speaking with the Earl, but then—" "He's decided I'm too old," Imogen said. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Too old to bear children, too old to manage his household, just too old. Her aunt's face showed shock, then anger. "How dare he, after leading us to believe—" "It doesn't matter," Imogen said, though of course it did. It mattered very much. "Aunt, I can't stay here. Everyone will know by now. They'll all be talking about it." The Countess looked around the room. Sure enough, people were looking their way, whispering behind fans and hands. "What will you do?" her aunt asked. Imogen thought quickly. She couldn't go back to her normal life in London. Not now. Not with everyone knowing that she'd been deemed too old to marry at 30. "I'll go to Cousin Helena," she said. The idea came to her suddenly, but it felt right. "In Cornwall, she's asked me to visit before." "Helena?" Her aunt looked shocked. "But she's so odd. Living all alone by the sea, practicing medicine like a man." "Yes," Imogen said, "and right now that sounds perfect." That night, after the last guest had gone home, Imogen sat at her desk and wrote a letter to her father's cousin, Dr. Helena Blackwood. She asked if she might come for an extended visit. She did not explain why. Then she packed a small bag with just the things she would need for the journey. Her other trunks could follow later. She needed to leave London as soon as possible. As the first light of dawn touched the windows of Hartwick House, Imogen slipped out the door and into a waiting carriage. She was going to Cornwall, to the wild sea, in the company of a woman who had made her own path in the world. For the first time since the Earl had rejected her in the garden, Imogen felt like she could breathe again. The carriage bumped along the rough road as it climbed the last hill. Imogen looked out the small window and caught her first sight of the sea. It spread out before her, a great blue blanket that reached all the way to the sky. After 3 days of travel, she had finally reached Cornwall. "That's Blackwood Cottage up ahead, miss," the driver called down to her. Imogen leaned forward to see. The house sat on the edge of a cliff, with the vast ocean behind it. It wasn't grand like the houses in London. It was made of grey stone with a slate roof, and it had windows that faced the sea. Smoke curled from one chimney, dancing in the salty breeze. The carriage stopped in front of a wooden gate. Imogen stepped down, her legs stiff from the long ride. The wind tugged at her hair and dress, stronger here than in London. It smelled of salt and something wild and free. Before she could reach for her bag, the front door of the cottage opened. A tall woman with grey-streaked brown hair stepped out. She wore a plain dark dress, not the fancy kind that ladies in London wore. She looked at Imogen with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So you've come," the woman said. Her voice was deep and clear. "I wondered if you really would." "Thank you for having me, Cousin Helena," Imogen said. She tried to smooth her wrinkled dress. "I hope I won't be too much trouble." Helena Blackwood looked her up and down. "Trouble? No, but you look half dead from that journey. Come inside before you fall over." Imogen followed her cousin into the cottage. Inside it was warm and smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Books filled shelves that lined the walls. There were strange things in glass jars, and bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling beams. It looked nothing like the neat, proper houses Imogen knew in London. The east room is yours, Helena said, leading the way up a narrow set of stairs. It gets good light for reading in the morning. I assume you brought books? Yes, Imogen said. Quite a few. Good. Sitting around feeling sorry for yourself is the worst thing for a broken heart. Imogen stopped on the stairs. I didn't say anything about a broken heart. Helena gave a short laugh. You didn't need to. Why else would a proper London lady suddenly want to visit her scandalous cousin in Cornwall? Your aunt would never have let you come unless something had gone very wrong. She started up the stairs again. Don't worry. I won't ask for details unless you want to tell me. The east room was small but clean. It had a bed with a blue quilt, a small desk under the window, a chair, and a chest for clothes. The window looked out over the sea, which was turning golden in the late afternoon sun. It's lovely, Imogen said, and she meant it. After the crowds and noise of London, this quiet room felt like a safe place to hide. Meals are at 8 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon and 7 in the evening, Helena said. I'm often out visiting patients or working in my study. Mrs. True comes in to cook and clean. She'll show you the paths along the cliffs if you want to walk. They're safe enough if you're careful. With that, Helena left her alone. Imogen sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sound of the waves hitting the rocks far below. For the first time in days, she let herself cry. The first 2 weeks at Blackwood Cottage passed in a fog of sadness. Imogen slept poorly at night, her dreams full of laughing faces and whispers behind fans. During the day, she forced herself to get up, to dress, to eat the simple food that Mrs. True prepared. She wrote polite letters to her aunt, saying that she was well and enjoying the sea air. She did not mention when she might return to London. Each morning she made herself walk along the cliff paths. The wind was always blowing, sometimes softly, sometimes so hard she had to lean into it to keep from being pushed back. The salt air burned her lungs and made her eyes water, but it also cleared her head. The crash of waves on rocks drowned out the whispers that still echoed in her mind. Too old, too old, too old. Slowly, the fog began to lift. One morning, Imogen woke up and realized she'd slept through the night without bad dreams. That same day, she found herself looking closely at the tiny flowers that grew in the cracks between rocks along her walking path. They were so small but so perfect, with purple petals and yellow centers. She wondered what they were called. That evening she couldn't sleep. But instead of lying in bed thinking about London, she lit a candle and went downstairs. Helena's study door was closed, but light showed under it. Imogen didn't knock. Instead, she went to the bookshelves that lined the walls of the sitting room. Helena's books weren't like the ones in London drawing rooms. There were books about the human body, about plants and animals, about the stars and the earth. There were books in French, German, and Latin. There were books about places far away, like China and Africa, and there were books of poetry. Imogen took down a small book of poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She settled into a chair by the dying fire and opened it to a page at random. I thought once how Theocritus had sung of the sweet years, the dear and wished-for years, who each one in a gracious hand appears to bear a gift for mortals, old or young. Her husband was 16 years younger than she was, you know, came Helena's voice from the doorway. Imogen looked up, startled. She hadn't heard her cousin come in. I didn't know that. And she had a baby when she was 40. Helena came into the room and poured 2 small glasses of amber liquid from a bottle on a side table. She handed one to Imogen. Brandy, good for sleepless nights. Imogen took a small sip. It burned going down, but then spread warmth through her chest. I didn't know people could have babies at 40. Society likes to tell women they're finished at 30, Helena said, sitting in the other chair, but nature tells a different story. She sipped her brandy. So does history. Elizabeth I ruled England until she was 70. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote her best work in her late 30s. I don't think I'll be ruling England or writing great books, Imogen said. Perhaps not, but you won't wither away and die either. Just because some old fool decided you were past your prime. Imogen felt a flash of anger, hot and surprising. He didn't just decide, he announced it to everyone. He let me think he was going to offer marriage. And then he told me I was too old in front of half of London society. She took another drink of brandy. By now, everyone who matters in London knows that Lady Imogen Blackwood is on the shelf for good. And does that matter? Helena asked. Does it matter what those people think? Of course it matters, Imogen said. It's the world I live in. It's the world you left, Helena corrected. You're here now. Imogen looked around at the book-filled room so different from the fancy drawing rooms of London. She thought of her walks along the cliffs, where no one cared if her hair was perfectly styled or her dress was the latest fashion. Yes, she said slowly. I am here now. That night marked a turning point. Imogen still felt the sting of the Earl's rejection. She still woke sometimes with her heart racing from dreams of pointing fingers and laughing faces. But during the day, she began to look outward instead of inward. She noticed how the light changed on the water at different times of day. She watched the seabirds soaring on the wind. She began to ask Helena questions about the books in her library, and sometimes Helena would answer with stories of her time studying medicine in Paris or treating patients in London before she moved to Cornwall. Imogen started writing in a small notebook, not just letters to her aunt, but thoughts and feelings that she had never put into words before. She drew pictures of the flowers she found on her walks. They weren't very good at first, but they got better with practice. One evening, a month after she'd arrived, Imogen sat by her bedroom window watching the sun set over the sea. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the water reflected the colours like a mirror. For the first time since she had left London, Imogen didn't wish she was someone else, somewhere else. She was glad to be exactly where she was. The leaves on the trees turned from green to red and gold as summer gave way to autumn. Imogen woke each morning to the sound of waves and seabirds. She had been at Blackwood Cottage for 3 months now, and it no longer felt strange to her. It felt like a place where she could breathe. One chilly morning, as Imogen sat at breakfast with Helena, her cousin pushed a large book across the table to her. You might find this useful, Helena said. For your flower drawings. Imogen opened the book to find detailed pictures of plants with their names and descriptions written beside them. The drawings showed not just how the plants looked, but all their tiny parts, stems, leaves and roots. These are beautiful, Imogen said, turning the pages carefully. They're scientific illustrations, Helena explained. They show plants the way they really are, not just the way they look pretty in a garden. The artist has to see every small detail. Imogen thought about the flower drawings she'd made. They were nice enough, but they didn't show the true nature of the plants. Could you teach me to draw like this? She asked. Helena raised her eyebrows. I'm a doctor, not an artist. But I could show you what to look for. The rest would be up to you. That afternoon, they walked along the cliff path together. Helena pointed out plants that most people would walk right past without noticing. Tiny flowers growing between rocks, moss clinging to tree trunks, seaweed washed up on the narrow beach below. Look at the way the stem connects to the leaf, Helena said, kneeling to point at a small plant. See how the veins branch out? And look at the edges. They have tiny teeth, like a saw. Imogen got down on her knees beside her cousin, not caring that her dress would get dirty. She looked closely at the leaf. It wasn't just green. It had shades of red at the edges and yellow near the stem. The tiny teeth were spaced evenly, like they had been measured with a ruler. I never really looked at plants this way before, Imogen admitted. Most people don't, Helena said. They see what they expect to see, not what's really there. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirt. That's true of people too. Back at the cottage, Helena cleared a space on her study table and set out paper, pencils and a magnifying glass. She showed Imogen how to look at a plant part by part, how to measure with her eye, how to draw what she saw instead of what she thought she should see. Imogen's first attempts were clumsy, but Helena didn't laugh or tell her to give up. She just pointed out where the drawing didn't match the plant and suggested trying again. By the end of the day, Imogen's fingers were smudged with pencil lead, and her back ached from bending over the table. But her last drawing looked much more like the real plant than her first. You have a good eye, Helena said, studying the drawing. With practice, you could be quite skilled at this. Over the next few weeks, Imogen practiced every day. She drew the plants Helena brought her. She learned their names and how they were used in medicine. She learned that some plants that looked alike were actually very different, and some that looked different were closely related. She began to see patterns that she had never noticed before. One stormy afternoon, when the wind and rain made it impossible to go outside, Imogen sat in Helena's study organising the older woman's papers. Helena had been writing about the plants she used in her medical work, but her notes were scattered and hard to read. Your handwriting is terrible, Imogen teased. holding up a page covered in scribbles. "I'm a doctor. We're known for bad handwriting," Helena replied, without looking up from the book she was reading. "And your drawings?" Imogen hesitated, not wanting to be rude. Helena laughed. "Are even worse than my handwriting. I know." Imogen looked at a rough sketch of a plant on one of the pages. She recognized it as comfrey, which Helena used to help heal broken bones. The drawing didn't show the hairy leaves or the bell-shaped flowers properly. "I could redraw this for you," she offered. "I could make all your plant drawings clearer for your notes." Helena looked up from her book. "That would be useful," she admitted. "Very useful, in fact." After that, Imogen spent part of each day working on illustrations for Helena's medical notes. She drew each plant carefully, showing all the parts that made it special. She labelled each drawing neatly, using the proper names that Helena taught her. It wasn't just pretty pictures, it was important work that would help Helena treat her patients. "You've been educated to please others," Helena said one evening, as they worked together at the study table. "It's time you educated yourself for your own interests." Imogen looked up from the drawing she was working on. "What do you mean?" "In London, you learned music and languages and painting to make yourself a pleasant companion for a husband," Helena explained. "But did any of that bring you joy? Did it give your life meaning?" Imogen thought about the endless hours she had spent practicing piano pieces she didn't like, memorizing French poetry she didn't understand, painting pretty scenes that all looked the same. "No," she admitted. "I did it because it was expected." "And now?" Helena gestured at the detailed drawing of Yarrow that Imogen had just finished. "This is different," Imogen said slowly. "I'm learning because I want to know. I'm drawing because I want to show what I see," she smiled. "And yes, it brings me joy." One cold November morning, a farmer came to the door, his face worried. His wife had fallen and hurt her arm, and he was afraid it might be broken. Helena grabbed her medical bag and headed for the door. Then she turned back. "Would you like to come with me?" she asked Imogen. "You could bring your drawing things. It might be useful to have a record of the injury." Imogen hesitated. She had never seen Helena's medical work up close. "Would your patient mind?" "Mrs. Penrose? No, she's known me for years." "She won't mind an extra pair of hands." The farmer's cottage was small but clean. Mrs. Penrose sat by the fire, her face pale with pain, her left arm cradled in her right. She looked surprised to see Imogen, but didn't object when Helena explained why she had come. As Helena gently examined the injured arm, she explained what she was doing and why. She showed Imogen how to tell a break from a sprain by feeling the bone. "It's not broken," she said at last, "but it's a bad sprain. We'll need to wrap it tightly and keep it still for at least 2 weeks." Imogen watched as Helena mixed herbs with warm water to make a paste. "This will help with the pain and swelling," Helena explained. She spread the paste on a clean cloth and wrapped it round Mrs. Penrose's arm. "Could you draw the arm as it looks now?" Helena asked Imogen. "And then again after I've wrapped it? It would be helpful for my notes." Imogen nodded and took out her paper and pencils. She worked quickly but carefully, showing the swelling and discoloration of the arm. Mrs. Penrose watched with interest. "You draw very well, miss," she said. "Is that what you do? Are you an artist?" The question caught Imogen by surprise. In London, she would have said, "Oh no, I just sketch a little, as all ladies do." But here, in this small cottage, with her fingers stained with pencil lead and her mind full of what she had just learned about treating sprains, the old answer didn't fit. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I am a botanical illustrator. I draw plants for medical purposes." It felt strange to claim this new identity, but it also felt true in a way that nothing had felt in a long time. On the walk home, Helena was quiet for a while. Then she said, "The Earl called you too old at 30 to be worth marrying. Is that what happened?" Imogen stumbled, shocked by the direct question. They had never discussed what had driven her from London. "How did you know?" "I have friends who write to me," Helena said. "Even in Cornwall we hear gossip." She looked sideways at Imogen. "Was I right?" Imogen nodded, her throat tight. "He said I was too old to have children. Too old to manage his household. Just too old," Helena snorted. "Men fear women who have found their minds," she said. "By 30, a woman knows herself too well to be easily shaped to a husband's wishes." "Is that why you never married?" Imogen asked, then bit her lip. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's a fair question," Helena said. I never married because I never met a man who valued my mind above my ability to keep his house and bear his children. So I chose to serve many people through medicine instead of serving one man through marriage." She shrugged. "It suits me." They walked in silence for a while, the path winding along the edge of the cliff. The sea below was grey and restless under the November sky. "What suits you, Imogen?" Helena asked at last. "Not what suited the girl you were in London, but what suits the woman you're becoming here?" Imogen thought about the drawing she'd made of Mrs. Penrose's arm, and all the plant illustrations she'd created for Helena's medical notes. She thought about the satisfaction she felt when she captured exactly how a leaf curled or a stem branched. She thought about the interest she had felt watching Helena treat her patient. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm just beginning to find out." Spring came to Cornwall, turning the cliffs green with new grass. Small flowers poked their heads through the soil, reaching for the sun. Imogen spent hours outside drawing the changes in the plants she'd come to know so well. She had filled 3 notebooks with drawings and notes over the winter months. "Your mind has grown rusty with disuse," Helena said one morning at breakfast. She dropped a paper on the table next to Imogen's plate. "Here, read this." Imogen picked up the paper. It was a notice about a talk at the Royal Cornwall Polytechnic Society in Falmouth. Someone named Dr. Sebastian Ash would speak about sea animals. "Why are you showing me this?" Imogen asked. "Because we're going," Helena said. "It's time you left this cliff and saw other people. Besides, the talk might be interesting. Dr. Ash is supposed to be quite smart." Imogen felt a flutter of worry in her stomach. She hadn't been in a room full of strangers since she left London almost a year ago. "I don't know, Helena. I'm not sure I'm ready." "Nonsense," Helena said firmly. "You've spent months healing your mind and heart. Now it's time to test their strength." Her voice softened. "Besides, no one in Falmouth will know or care about London gossip." Imogen thought about it. Part of her wanted to stay safe at Blackwood Cottage forever. But another part, a growing part, was curious about the world beyond their cliff. "All right," she agreed. "When is it?" The day of the lecture, Imogen stood in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, trying to decide what to wear. Her London dresses seemed too fancy for Cornwall, but her everyday clothes might not be nice enough for a public talk. In the end, she chose a simple blue dress with a white collar. She pulled her hair back in a knot at the base of her neck. No curls, no fancy combs, just neat and clean. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked different from the Lady Imogen who had left London. Her face was a bit more tanned from all her time outdoors. Her hands were not as soft, and there were tiny lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting at small details in her drawings. She looked like herself, she decided, not like someone trying to please others. Helena wore her usual dark dress, but had added a nicer shawl for the occasion. They took Helena's small carriage to Falmouth, a bigger town than the village near Blackwood Cottage. There were more people on the streets, more noise and movement. Imogen felt her heart beat faster. "Are you all right?" Helena asked as they walked from where they had left the carriage to the building where the lecture would be held. "Yes," Imogen said, taking a deep breath, "just a bit nervous." The room where the talk would be given was already half full when they arrived. There were about 50 people there, mostly men, but a few women too. Most wore plain, practical clothes. These were not the fancy people of London society, Imogen realised. These were people who were here to learn. Helena led the way to seats near the front. As they sat down, Imogen looked around. No one was staring at her. No one was whispering behind their hands. No one knew or cared that she had been rejected by an earl in London. A tall man walked to the front of the room. He looked to be about 40, with dark hair streaked with a little grey at the temples. He wore a plain black coat and had the tanned skin of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. This must be Dr. Ash, Imogen thought. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was deep and clear, easy to hear at the back of the room. "Thank you for coming to hear about my work with sea animals along the Cornish coast." As he began to speak, Imogen found herself drawn into his talk. He described how he studied the tiny animals that lived in the sea, some so small they could only be seen with special tools. He talked about how these animals lived and grew, and how they were different from animals that lived on land. "The sea holds secrets that we are only beginning to understand," he said. "What looks empty to most people is actually full of life when you know how to look." Imogen leaned forward in her seat, interested. This was like what Helena had taught her about really seeing plants, not just looking at them. Dr. Ashe showed drawings of the sea animals he studied. They were good, but Imogen could see ways they could be better. They didn't show all the details that would help someone really understand these creatures. After Dr. Ashe finished speaking, he asked if anyone had questions. Several people raised their hands, and he answered each question carefully. Imogen listened to the back and forth, learning more with each answer. Then, without really planning to, she raised her hand. Dr. Ashe pointed to her. Yes, the lady in blue. Imogen's mouth felt dry, but she made herself speak clearly. In your drawings, you show these sea animals as plants, but in your talk, you said they are animals. I'm confused because I've been studying plants for some time now, and these look like seaweed to me. A hush fell over the room. Women didn't usually ask such direct questions in public, but Dr. Ashe didn't look shocked or upset. An excellent observation, he said, nodding to her. Many of these creatures do look very much like plants, which confused scientists for many years. The line between plant and animal is not always clear in the sea. Some creatures that look like plants are actually animals, and some that move like animals are more like plants in how they live. He smiled slightly. You have a good eye. Are you a botanist? I'm a botanical illustrator, Imogen said, the words coming more easily now than they had the first time she said them. I've been documenting coastal plants for medical use. Indeed. Dr. Ashe looked intrigued. I would be interested to see your work. The usual botanical illustrations I've seen focus more on making the plants look pretty than on showing their true nature. That's because most illustrators aren't properly taught what to look for, Imogen replied. They draw what they think they see, not what is really there. Several people in the audience nodded, and Imogen realized they were following the conversation with interest, not shock that she had spoken up. After the talk ended, Helena made her way to the front of the room where Dr. Ashe was speaking with a small group of people. Imogen followed, feeling strangely nervous again. Dr. Ashe, Helena said when it was their turn to speak to him. I'm Dr. Helena Blackwood. We corresponded some years ago about the medicinal uses of seaweed. Dr. Blackwood! Dr. Ashe's face lit up with recognition. Of course, I remember your letters. Your work on using seaweed poultices for wounds was most interesting. Thank you, Helena said. May I present my cousin, Lady Imogen Blackwood? She's the botanical illustrator who asked about your sea animals. Dr. Ashe turned to Imogen with new interest. Lady Imogen, I didn't realize you were nobility. Imogen felt her face grow warm. Here in Cornwall, I'm just Imogen, Dr. Ashe. My title doesn't mean much outside of London drawing rooms. And it means even less in tide pools and cliff paths, he said with a small smile. Please, call me Sebastian. Titles don't mean much in science either. Imogen has been helping me document the medicinal plants that grow along our coast, Helena explained. Her drawings are quite detailed. I would very much like to see them, Sebastian said. In fact, I'm working on a paper about how certain seaweeds might be used in medicine. Perhaps your illustrations could help clarify some points. I would be happy to show you my work, Imogen said. She was surprised by how much she meant it. This wasn't like talking to people in London, where every word had to be carefully chosen. This was a real conversation about things that mattered. Dr. Ashe, Sebastian, is staying in Falmouth for the next month, Helena said. I've invited him to visit Blackwood Cottage next week to see my collection of medicinal plants. You'll be able to show him your drawings then. On the carriage ride home, Imogen was quiet, thinking about the day. It had been her first time in a crowd since leaving London, and it had gone better than she could have hoped. No one had stared or whispered. No one had treated her like she was too old or not good enough. And Dr. Ashe, Sebastian, had talked to her like an equal, like someone whose thoughts and work mattered. What did you think of the lecture? Helena asked. It was interesting, Imogen said. I hadn't thought much about sea animals before. I've been so focused on plants. And what did you think of Dr. Ashe? Imogen glanced at her cousin, suspicious of the too casual tone. He seems very knowledgeable, and not at all concerned with London gossip or the proper age for a woman to marry, Helena added with a small smile. Helena? Imogen felt her face grow warm again. I wasn't thinking of him that way at all. Of course not, Helena said, still smiling. But you might consider that not all men are like the Earl of Wexford. Some value a woman's mind as much as, or more than, her youth or family connections. Imogen looked out the window at the passing countryside. She wasn't ready to think about marriage or romance. The wound from London was healed, but the scar was still tender. Yet she couldn't deny that talking with Sebastian Ash had awakened something in her that had been sleeping for a long time, a sense of being seen and heard for who she truly was, not just for what she represented in society's eyes. "I'm looking forward to showing him my drawings," she admitted. "Good," Helena said. "It's time you shared your work with someone besides me and Mrs. True. You've grown too much to keep your light hidden on this lonely cliff." Imogen thought about the months she had spent at Blackwood Cottage, healing in solitude. She thought about how frightened she had been to attend the lecture today. And she thought about how good it had felt to speak her mind and be heard. "Yes," she said softly, "I think perhaps it is time." A week after the lecture, Imogen woke early to the sound of gulls crying over the sea. Today Dr. Ash, Sebastian, would visit Blackwood Cottage. She tried to tell herself that it didn't matter what she wore, but she still spent more time than usual choosing her dress. She picked a simple green one that matched the new leaves on the trees. "You look nice," Helena said when Imogen came down to breakfast. "But you might want to wear your old brown dress if we're going to be looking at tide pools later." "Tide pools?" Imogen hadn't known that was part of the plan. "Sebastian wants to show us some of the sea creatures he talked about in his lecture," Helena explained. "The best time to see them is at low tide, which is early afternoon today." Imogen went back upstairs and changed into her brown dress, the one she wore for collecting plants along the cliff paths. It had pockets for her small notebooks and pencils, and the hem was already stained with salt water and mud. She braided her hair tightly so it wouldn't blow in her face if the wind was strong. When she came back down, Helena nodded approval. "Much more practical." "I look like a country girl, not a lady," Imogen said. "Good," Helena replied. "Ladies can't climb on rocks or kneel in wet sand." Imogen laughed. A year ago she would have been horrified at the thought of a gentleman seeing her in such a plain dress, with her hair simply braided and no jewellery except the small watch pinned to her bodice. Now she didn't care. What mattered was that she could move freely and see clearly. Sebastian arrived just after noon, riding a sturdy brown horse. He too was dressed for outdoor work, in boots that looked well worn and a coat that had seen better days. He tied his horse to the fence post and greeted Helena warmly. "Dr. Blackwood, thank you for the invitation. I've been looking forward to seeing your medicinal plant collection." Then he turned to Imogen and his smile softened. "Lady Imogen, good day to you." "Good day, Dr. Ash," she replied. "And please, just Imogen is fine." "Then you must call me Sebastian," he said. "Shall we begin with your botanical illustrations? I'm quite eager to see them." They went into Helena's study, where Imogen had laid out her best drawings on the large table. Sebastian bent over them, studying each one with care. "These are excellent," he said, looking at a drawing of a small plant that grew in the cracks of rocks. "You've captured the way the leaves fold in on themselves during dry weather. Most illustrators miss that detail." Imogen felt a warm glow of pride. "Helena taught me to observe before drawing, to really see what's there rather than what I expect to see." "A valuable lesson," Sebastian said. "Too many people, scientists included, see only what they expect." He moved to the next drawing, which showed a kind of seaweed that Helena used to treat burns. "The detail here is remarkable. You've even shown the tiny air sacs that help it float." "I had to wade into the water to see them properly," Imogen admitted. "My boots were full of seawater by the time I finished." Sebastian laughed. "The price we pay for knowledge. I've ruined more pairs of boots in tide pools than I care to count." They spent an hour going through Imogen's drawings. Sebastian asked questions about how certain plants grew and where they could be found. Imogen found herself talking more than she had in ages, explaining her observations and the techniques she had developed for showing tiny details. "I think your illustrations would be perfect for my paper on medicinal seaweeds," Sebastian said at last. "Would you consider allowing me to include them?" Imogen looked at Helena, unsure. "Would that be proper? To have my drawings published?" "Proper?" Helena snorted. "Who cares about proper? It would be useful, and that matters more." "I would credit you fully, of course," Sebastian added. "Your name would appear alongside mine as the illustrator." Imogen thought about seeing her name in print, about her drawings being used by doctors and scientists. It was far from what she'd been raised to want, yet the idea filled her with joy. "I would be honoured," she said. After they had looked at all the drawings, Helena suggested they walk down to the shore to see the tide pools. The path was steep and rocky in places. Sebastian offered Imogen his arm for the tricky parts, but he didn't hover over her like she might break, the way men in London would have done. "Watch your step here," he said at one point, but it was the same warning he gave to Helena. He treated them both as capable women, not delicate flowers. The tide was out, leaving pools of seawater trapped among the rocks. Sebastian led them to a large pool and knelt beside it. "Look here," he said, pointing to what looked like a flower growing on a rock under the water. "What does this appear to be?" "A plant of some kind," Imogen said, kneeling beside him. "It has what look like petals, but they're moving slightly." "Exactly," Sebastian said, his eyes lighting up. "It looks like a plant, but it's actually an animal, a sea anemone. Those petals are tentacles it uses to catch food." Imogen leaned closer, fascinated. "It's beautiful. Beautiful and dangerous if you're a small fish," Sebastian said. "Those tentacles can sting." He showed them other creatures in the tide pools, tiny crabs no bigger than her thumbnail, snails with swirled shells, and strange blob-like things that he said were the eggs of fish. "The sea is full of wonders if you know where to look," he said, helping Imogen over a slippery rock. His hand was warm and strong, and he didn't let go right away when she was safely across. They spent the afternoon exploring the shore. Sebastian was a good teacher, patient and clear. He answered all of Imogen's questions without talking down to her, and he listened when she shared her observations, sometimes nodding and saying, "I hadn't noticed that before." The sun was starting to sink toward the sea when they finally turned back toward Blackwood Cottage. Sebastian had collected some samples of seaweed in a bucket of seawater. "Would you be willing to draw these for me?" he asked Imogen. "I want to document exactly how they look when fresh from the sea. By tomorrow they'll start to change colour and shape." "Of course," Imogen said. "I can start right away." Back at the cottage, Helena invited Sebastian to stay for dinner. While Mrs. True prepared the meal, Imogen set up her drawing materials at the study table. Sebastian arranged his seaweed samples in shallow dishes of seawater. "You see patterns where others see only chaos," he said, as he watched her begin to draw. "That's a rare gift." "Or perhaps just the perspective of someone who has stood outside the normal order of things," Imogen replied without thinking. Then she blushed, realizing how personal the words were. But Sebastian didn't look put off. "I think you're right," he said softly. "Sometimes we have to step away from what we know to see what's really there." Their eyes met, and Imogen felt something shift in the air between them. This wasn't like the empty flirtations of London ballrooms. This was a connection of minds, a recognition of something shared. The moment was broken by Mrs. True calling them to dinner. The meal was simple but good. Fish caught that morning, spring vegetables from Helena's garden, fresh bread still warm from the oven. They talked about Sebastian's work, about Helena's patience, about Imogen's growing collection of botanical illustrations. "You're not what I expected in a duke," Imogen said when there was a pause in the conversation. Then she covered her mouth, embarrassed by her boldness. Sebastian looked surprised. "How did you know I hold that title?" "I don't use it in my scientific work." "Helena told me," Imogen admitted, "after the lecture." "I see." He shot an amused look at Helena, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "And what did you expect in a duke, Imogen?" "Someone more interested in property and bloodlines than in knowledge," she said honestly. "Someone who would view science as just a hobby, not serious work. Someone who—" She hesitated. "Go on," he encouraged. "Someone who would care more about whether a woman could provide heirs than about her mind or her spirit," she finished in a rush. Sebastian's eyes darkened. "I see you have met such men before." "Once or twice," Imogen said, trying to make her voice light. "Then we have both had our expectations overturned," Sebastian said. "For I confess I had a similar view of London ladies, that they were shallow creatures concerned only with fashion and marriage prospects." His gaze held hers. "I am very glad to have been proven wrong." After dinner, Sebastian had to leave to ride back to Falmouth before it got too dark. Imogen walked with him to where his horse was tied. "I'll return next week to see the finished drawings, if I may," he said, as he untied the reins. "I'll have them ready," Imogen promised, "and perhaps you could show me more of your sea creatures then." "I would like that very much," he said. He hesitated, then took her hand and raised it to his lips, not in the practiced way of a London gentleman, but with a sincerity that made her heart beat faster. "Until next week, then." Imogen watched him ride away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. She wasn't ready to put a name to what she was feeling. It was too new, too fragile. But for the first time since the disaster in London, She found herself looking forward to the future with hope instead of dread. Summer came to Cornwall in a burst of colour. The cliffs bloomed with purple heather and yellow gorse. The sea turned from grey to blue under clear skies, and Imogen's heart bloomed too, opening like a flower after a long winter. Sebastian came to Blackwood Cottage every week. Sometimes he brought new sea creatures for Imogen to draw. Sometimes they walked along the shore together, talking about his work or hers. Sometimes Helena joined them, but often she was busy with her patients, leaving Imogen and Sebastian alone together. "You've changed since we first met," Sebastian said one warm day as they sat on a flat rock by the sea. "You seem freer somehow." Imogen smiled, looking out at the waves. "I am freer. When I first came to Cornwall, I was running away from something. Now I'm running towards something instead." Sebastian's hand found hers on the rock between them. "What are you running toward, Imogen?" he asked softly. Before she could answer, they heard someone calling her name. They turned to see Mrs. True hurrying down the path toward them, waving a letter. "Lady Imogen, a letter from London. Your aunt says it's very important." Imogen's stomach tightened with worry. She hadn't heard from her aunt in months, not since she'd written to say she was staying in Cornwall indefinitely. She took the letter with shaking hands. The seal was from Hartwick House, her aunt's home. She broke it and unfolded the thick paper. As she read, her face grew pale. "What is it?" Sebastian asked. "Bad news?" "Not exactly," Imogen said slowly. "My aunt writes that the Earl of Wexford has been widowed again." She swallowed hard. His young wife died in childbirth. Both she and the baby were lost. "I'm sorry to hear it," Sebastian said, "though I gather from your tone that this man means something to you personally." Imogen hadn't told Sebastian the whole story of why she had left London. She had been too ashamed, too afraid he would see her differently if he knew she had been publicly rejected. "The Earl once considered offering for my hand," she said carefully, "but he decided I was unsuitable." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Unsuitable? You?" "I was 30, Imogen explained. "Too old in his view and in the view of London society to be worth marrying. He worried I couldn't give him more heirs." Her laugh held no humour. "It seems even a young bride was no guarantee of that." Sebastian's hand tightened around hers. "What a fool," he said quietly. Imogen looked back at the letter. "My aunt says that society now thinks the Earl might reconsider me. My family connections are still good, and I'm known to be sensible and well-bred. She wants me to return to London immediately, to be there when the Earl begins looking for his next wife." "And what do you want?" Sebastian asked. Imogen stared at the letter, thinking hard. A year ago, she would have rushed back to London at the first hint that she might have a second chance. A year ago, being the wife of an earl had been her dearest wish. A year ago, she had believed that marriage, any marriage to a man of good family, was her only path to security and respect. But now, "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels I should go back. It's what I was raised for, what my family expects. And the Earl is wealthy. I would never have to worry about my future." "But," Sebastian prompted. "But I've found something here that I never had in London," Imogen said. "Purpose, meaning. I've discovered that I have a mind worth using and skills worth developing. If I go back—" "If you go back, you'll have to hide those parts of yourself," Sebastian finished for her. "You'll have to be the proper Lady Imogen again, concerned only with social niceties and running a grand household." "Yes," she whispered. "And I'm not sure I can do that anymore." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves. Then Sebastian stood and held out his hand. "Come," he said. "I have something to show you." He led her along a path she had never taken before, one that wound away from Blackwood Cottage and over the next hill. After walking for about 20 minutes, they came to a place where the path opened up to a view of a large stone house set on a cliff much like the one where Helena lived. The house was bigger than Blackwood Cottage, with more windows and a small garden in front. The path led right to its door. "What is this place?" Imogen asked. "Thornfield Hall," Sebastian said. "My home." Imogen looked at him in surprise. "You never mentioned you lived so close to us." "I've been staying in Falmouth for my research," he explained. "But this is where I live when I'm not travelling." He turned to her, his face serious. "Would you like to see it?" Imogen hesitated. In London, it would be highly improper for her to visit a man's home without a chaperone, but they were not in London, and the old rules seemed far away and unimportant. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." The inside of Thornfield Hall was unlike any grand house Imogen had seen before. Instead of fancy drawing rooms filled with delicate furniture, there were rooms lined with bookshelves and filled with interesting objects, shells, stones, dried plants, and strange instruments she didn't recognize. "It's not what most people expect in a duke's home," Sebastian said, watching her look around. "My family thinks I'm quite mad to live this way." "I think it's wonderful," Imogen said honestly. He showed her his library, where thousands of books filled the walls from floor to ceiling. He showed her his laboratory, where he studied the sea creatures he collected. He showed her a room full of illustrations, some his own, some by other artists, of plants and animals from around the world. "This is why I rarely go to London," he explained. "My work is here. My heart is here." He looked at her intently. "And now I find myself wishing that you would stay here too." Imogen's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" Sebastian took both her hands in his. "I'm saying that since we met, my work has been better because of your insights. My days have been brighter because of your company. My life has been fuller because you are in it." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm saying that I love you, Imogen Blackwood. Not despite your age, but because of the woman your years have shaped you to be." Imogen felt tears spring to her eyes. "Sebastian." Before she could say more, they heard the sound of carriage wheels on the path outside. Sebastian frowned and went to the window. "Are you expecting visitors?" Imogen asked. "No," he said, "and that's a London carriage, not a local one." They went to the front door together and watched as an elegant carriage pulled by 4 matching horses came to a stop in front of the house. The crest on the door made Imogen's heart sink. "Wexford," she whispered. The carriage door opened, and the Earl of Wexford stepped out. He looked older than when Imogen had last seen him, his face more lined, his shoulders more stooped. He walked with a heavier limp, leaning hard on his cane. He looked up and saw Imogen standing in the doorway next to Sebastian. Surprise, then satisfaction crossed his face. "Lady Imogen," he called, "what a happy chance to find you here. I've just come from Blackwood Cottage, where your cousin told me I might find you in the company of the Duke of Thornfield." Sebastian stepped slightly in front of Imogen, a protective gesture that didn't escape her notice. "Lord Wexford," he said coolly, "this is an unexpected visit." "I've come on a matter of some importance," the Earl said. He looked at Imogen. "A matter best discussed privately, perhaps." "Anything you wish to say to Lady Imogen can be said in my presence," Sebastian replied. His voice was calm but firm. The Earl raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. "Very well. Lady Imogen, I've come to escort you back to London. Your aunt informs me you've been living in virtual exile here in Cornwall. She was most concerned for your welfare." "My exile, as you call it, has been entirely by choice, Lord Wexford," Imogen said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "And I am in no need of an escort anywhere." "Come, come," the Earl said in the tone one might use with a child. "Surely you've had enough of this rustic life. It may have been a pleasant diversion during your unfortunate situation, but things have changed." He straightened his shoulders. "I've come to inform you that I am reconsidering my previous decision regarding our association." Imogen stared at him in disbelief. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I am prepared to overlook the matter of your age," the Earl said magnanimously. "Your aunt assures me that despite your time in the countryside, you still possess the accomplishments and breeding necessary to be the Countess of Wexford." He glanced dismissively at Sebastian. "Whatever. Interests you've developed here can be set aside once we return to civilization." Imogen felt Sebastian tense beside her, but when she looked at his face, she saw not anger, but concern. For her, not for himself. He was letting her make her own choice, and suddenly the choice was very clear. "My interests, as you call them, are not passing fancies, Lord Wexford," she said. "They are my life's work, and they are valued here as I am valued. Not for my family name or my manners or my ability to run a grand house, but for my mind and my spirit. Whims and fancies," the Earl dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Understandable diversions for a woman in your situation. But surely you recognize that my offer represents your best hope for a respectable future." "My best hope," Imogen repeated. The words hung in the air, an echo of the humiliation she had suffered a year ago. But now, instead of crushing her, they made everything crystal clear. "My dear Lord Wexford," she said, stepping forward, "you mistake yourself. I am not a desperate spinster grateful for your belated recognition of my worth. I am a woman who has discovered that life holds possibilities far beyond the narrow confines of the marriage mart." She reached back and took Sebastian's hand. "My future lies where my heart and mind are equally engaged." The Earl's face turned red with shock and anger. "You would refuse an Earl for what? A life of scientific oddities with an eccentric Duke?" "I would refuse emptiness for fulfillment," Imogen said gently, "and I would advise you, my lord, to seek a bride whose youth blinds her to the difference." Wexford sputtered, unable to believe what he was hearing. "This is madness. What will society say?" "I no longer care what society says," Imogen replied. "I care what I say, what I feel, what I know to be true." She squeezed Sebastian's hand. "And the truth is, I have found where I belong." The Earl looked from Imogen to Sebastian and back again. Then, with as much dignity as he could muster, he turned and limped back to his carriage. As it rolled away down the path, Imogen felt a great weight lift from her shoulders, the weight of others' expectations, of society's narrow rules, of her own fears. She turned to Sebastian, her heart full. "I choose this life," she said simply. "I choose you." Sebastian gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "And I choose you, Imogen Blackwood, with all your wisdom, and all your strength, and all your beautiful seeing eyes." As the sun began to set over the sea, casting golden light through the windows of Thornfield Hall, Imogen knew she had made the right choice, not just for now, but for all the days to come. Autumn leaves danced on the breeze as Imogen stood in the small stone church near the cliffs. Sunlight streamed through the old stained glass windows, painting rainbows on the floor at her feet. This was not the grand cathedral wedding she had once dreamed of in London. It was smaller, simpler, and far more perfect. Helena stood beside her, wearing a dark blue dress instead of her usual black. Her stern face had softened into a rare smile. "Are you ready?" she asked. Imogen nodded. She wore a gown of pale gold, the colour of late afternoon sunlight. Her hair was braided with small white flowers from the cliff paths. Around her neck hung a pendant Sebastian had given her, a tiny piece of amber with a perfect leaf trapped inside. "I've been ready for a long time," she said. "I just didn't know what I was waiting for." The church was not filled with London society in their fancy clothes. Instead, the wooden pews held the people who had become important in Imogen's new life. Mrs. True and her family, the local villagers whom Helena had treated, the scholars and scientists who had worked with Sebastian. These were people who knew Imogen not as Lady Imogen Blackwood, daughter of a good family, but as Imogen the botanical illustrator, whose drawings helped doctors understand how to use plants for healing. Music began to play, not a grand organ, but a simple violin, sweet and clear in the small space. Imogen walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Sebastian waiting for her at the altar. He wore a plain dark coat, not the fancy clothes a duke would usually wear for his wedding. His smile when he saw her was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. The old vicar, who had known Sebastian since he was a boy, spoke the simple words that would join them together. Imogen and Sebastian had written their own promises to add to the ceremony. "I take you not to complete me, for I am whole," Sebastian said, his deep voice filling the small church, "but to share in life's wonders, to explore the world's mysteries, to find joy in discovery, together." "I take you not as a safe harbour from the storms of life," Imogen replied, her voice clear and sure, "but as a fellow traveller on a path of purpose, a partner in work and wonder, a companion in joy and growth." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, the small church filled with honest cheers from people who knew them both and wished them well. No one whispered behind fans about Imogen's age or wondered if she could bear children. No one cared that she had once been rejected by an earl. Here, she was valued for herself, for her mind and heart, for the work of her hands and the strength of her spirit. The wedding feast was held at Thornfield Hall, in the large room that Sebastian had cleared of books and specimens for the occasion. The tables were decorated not with expensive flowers from hothouses, but with arrangements of local plants that Imogen had chosen, heather and gorse, sea lavender and wild thyme, each with its own beauty and purpose. The food was simple but plentiful, fresh fish from the sea, vegetables from local gardens, bread baked that morning in the village ovens. There was no fancy French chef, no elaborate dishes meant to impress. It was honest food, meant to nourish and please, just as their marriage would be an honest one, built on true respect and love. As the sun began to set, Imogen and Sebastian slipped away from the celebration. Hand in hand, they walked down the path to the shore, to the tide pools where they had first begun to know each other. The setting sun turned the water to gold and red, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Sebastian asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Imogen said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "A year ago I thought my life was over. Now I know it's just beginning." 3 weeks later, they boarded a ship bound for Greece. This was their honeymoon journey, but it was also a research trip. Sebastian wanted to study the sea life of the Mediterranean, and Imogen would document it with her drawings. The ship was small but sturdy, with comfortable cabins for passengers. As it sailed away from the English coast, Imogen stood at the rail, watching her homeland fade into the distance. She felt no sadness, only excitement for what lay ahead. The journey took them first to France, then along the coasts of Spain and Italy, and finally to Greece. They stopped in Athens, where Sebastian had arranged for them to meet with other scientists and scholars. Imogen was nervous at first, unsure how she would be received. Would they see her only as Sebastian's wife, or would they value her work in its own right? She need not have worried. When Sebastian introduced her as my wife and research partner, Lady Imogen Ashe, the scholars greeted her with respect. They had seen her illustrations in Sebastian's published papers and were eager to discuss her techniques. "Your drawings have clarified many points that were previously confusing," said one old professor, his eyes bright behind thick spectacles. "The detail you capture is remarkable." In Athens they stayed in a small villa overlooking the sea. The light there was different from Cornwall, clearer, sharper, turning everything to gold and blue. Imogen filled page after page in her notebooks, drawing the strange new plants that grew in the rocky soil and the colourful fish that swam in the clear waters. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sunset, Sebastian showed her a letter he had received from England. "I've been thinking about what to do with Thornfield Hall when we return," he said. "It's too big for just the two of us." "What do you have in mind?" Imogen asked. "I want to start a small research institute," Sebastian explained. "A place where scholars can come to study, especially those who don't have the money or connections to work at the big universities. People with good minds, but no fancy titles or rich families." "Like women, you mean?" Imogen said with a smile. "Exactly like women," Sebastian agreed. "Women like Helena, who had to fight for every bit of her education. Women who see things others miss." He took her hand. "Women like you." 6 months after their wedding, Imogen stood in the largest room of Thornfield Hall, now transformed into a library and workspace. Shelves lined the walls filled with books and specimens. Tables held microscopes and other tools for study. Large windows let in plenty of light for drawing and reading. The Thornfield Institute for Natural Studies had just opened its doors to its first group of scholars. There were 5 of them, 3 women and 2 men, all chosen for their intelligence and passion for learning rather than their social standing. Helena had agreed to serve as the medical director, overseeing a growing collection of healing plants started from specimens that Imogen and Sebastian had gathered in Greece. Imogen's illustrations, published alongside Sebastian's research, had earned respect from naturalists across Europe. Letters came regularly, asking for her to illustrate other scientific works. She chose carefully, taking on only projects that interested her and would advance useful knowledge. On the anniversary of her humiliation at the Hartwick Ball, Imogen sat at her desk by the window that overlooked the sea. She was finishing a drawing of a rare plant they had found in a hidden valley in Greece. Sebastian came in with a pot of tea and placed it beside her. "A letter from your aunt," he said, handing her an envelope. "She writes quite often for someone who once called Cornwall a wasteland fit only for sheep." Imogen laughed and opened the letter. Her aunt had finally visited them 2 months ago and had been surprised by the comfort of Thornfield Hall and the interesting people who came there to work and study. The letter contained news of London, who had married, who had died, who had fallen in or out of favour. "The Earl of Wexford has married again," Imogen read aloud. "A girl of 18 with a large fortune but no important family connections. Aunt says everyone is calling it a brilliant match. Poor girl, Sebastian said, pouring tea into 2 cups, to be valued only for her youth and her money. Imogen folded the letter and put it aside. Do you ever regret marrying someone past her prime? She asked, half joking but with a hint of real question. Someone who may never give you heirs for your dukedom? Sebastian set down the teapot and came to stand behind her chair. His hands rested gently on her shoulders. How could I regret choosing joy over emptiness? If we have children, they will be a blessing. If we don't, we still have a life full of purpose and discovery. He bent to kiss the top of her head. And we have each other. Imogen reached up to cover his hand with hers. Through the window she could see the waves rolling in, constant and ever-changing like life itself. The cliff path where she'd once walked in lonely sadness was now the route she took with Sebastian to explore tide pools and collect specimens. The cottage where she had hidden from the world was now a place she visited to share new discoveries with Helena. Some flowers bloom most beautifully in autumn, she said softly, when summer's bright blossoms have faded. Sebastian's arms wrapped around her from behind, warm and secure. And continue blooming through winter and beyond, he added. Together they watched the sea, no longer bound by society's narrow rules about what made a life worthwhile. They had found something better than what either of them had been taught to want, a partnership of minds and hearts, a life of purpose and meaning, a love based not on youth or title or fortune, but on seeing and valuing the true person within. What had once seemed Imogen's greatest disappointment had led her to her greatest joy, the discovery not only of a true partner but of her authentic self.